What do the World Economic Forum and South by Southwest and the Tokyo Motor Show all have in common? Well, they had the good sense to bring our guest in to speak to their audiences. Yes, futurist and founder Kian Gohar, founder of GeoLab, former executive director of Singularity U and of XPRIZE, is our guest here on Inside the Author Studio. And I've had an opportunity to know Kian over the arc of his book, from the idea in his head and conceptualizing it, to actually partnering with Keith Ferrazzi on it, to getting a nice deal with Harvard Book Review, and then promoting it at South by Southwest and around. And he is home now for just a little bit because he's been riding that book train and traveling around the world and speaking on it to corporate audiences and to conventions. So please join me in welcoming tonight's guest to Inside the Author Studio, Kian Gohar.
Hi, Sam. It's great to see you. And hi, everyone on the live stream. Really a pleasure to be here and share some stories of writing and the process of publishing a book.
And process is the word, isn't it? It's, Kian, one of the things with XPRIZE, and I also had an opportunity to see you give an incredible workshop on moonshots. And this was an interactive seminar in person, and you help people identify something that would put the light on in their eyes, something that would give them ikigai, you know, Japanese for a reason to get up in the morning, purpose. And then you actually help them with the process of like, all right, how are they going to go from ideation to execution to reality? And that's what we're going to be talking about your book today. Sound good, Kian?
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. I always enjoy our conversation, Sam.
Good. All right. Well, let's start with the beginning. Somehow this idea for writing this book popped into your head. So start us from the beginning, if you would.
So I've been studying technology innovation for many years when I was working at the XPRIZE, and I was always concerned about the impact on jobs and the future of work as a result of AI and automation. And then sometime around the late 2010s, I came to the conclusion that the best way for us to compete against technology was to really double down on those things that made humans competitive vis-a-vis the tech, which was those issues around problem solving, collaboration, empathy, creativity, and innovation. And so I wanted to think about and write about and research what were those things that made us exponential humans rather than just thinking about exponential technologies. And so this was sort of the background. It was bubbling for a few years prior to the pandemic. I do a lot of executive coaching for organizations and leadership teams, helping them to learn about exponential technologies. And when the pandemic hit, a lot of our clients were very concerned about what were they going to do, because nobody had a playbook for how to lead in a virtual world. And so my dear friend, Keith Ferrazzi, and I got together and we said, we have to help our clients figure out how to lead in this virtual world. And so we started a series of town halls directly focused on specific functional groups within organizations. For example, CFOs or chief technology officers or chief HR officers. And we really wanted to crowdsource best practices for how to lead in a world of lockdown. And so we would host these town halls for several weeks at a time to crowdsource best practices. And we thought that this would be just a small research project that would last a few weeks, because we all assumed that we'd go back to quote unquote the normal world after 2, 3, 4 weeks of lockdown. And we came to realize very quickly after the lockdowns that this wasn't going to just be a 2-month research project, but that it was going to be the new world of work was fundamentally going to be different than the past. And so this 2-month research project turned into an 18-month research project, which then led to the publishing of the book with Harvard Business Review. So that's sort of like the genesis of the story from the last 5-7 years. And there's the copy of the book.
This book?
That book.
Okay, now Keon, so now we've just talked about a little bit of like leading during lockdown and what you started with focus groups and with town halls with your clients, with your Fortune 500 companies around the world, that then turned into an 18-month research project and then turned into this book. Tell me how it felt when you held this puppy in your hand.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that I actually had a printed copy of my book and that I was going to be a published author. And to be honest with you, the book published 3 months ago and 2 days ago, and I still don't conceptualize that I'm a published author. And obviously I am, but it felt great to really see it all in print. The thing that was also hard was that we actually did quite a bit of research after our final manuscript deadline. And so those new learnings couldn't go into the book because the copy had to be locked down and go to print in the fall, so several months before the actual pub date. And so we kept researching and writing, and so all that stuff went into new pieces of writing. And so the research has really continued even after we locked down our writing in the early fall of 2021. So it felt really good to get the book, and I think it's one of those things that you check off in your life that you've done. And I'll be honest, I don't know if I could ever do it again. It was you've written several books, Sam, and you're the master of this. It is just all encompassing, and I couldn't understand prior to publication why people would go through this torture more than once. But there's so much value to sharing insights and ideas and helping other people learn through the written medium. So now that I'm on the other side of it, I can definitely understand why people keep doing this.
Well, and see, you've brought up something. We like to get into the weeds here because this is the Stop Wishing, Start Writing group, and we like to pull back the curtain on the writing process. And now you did something that some people are considering doing, which is partnering or co-authoring a book. So how did you and Keith work this? Did you write different chapters? Would one write and the other then would edit? How was your actual system for going about this?
So that's a great question. So our book, Competing in the New World of Work, is all about how can organizations thrive in a world of uncertainty post-pandemic. And we looked at it from three different angles. One from the angle of the employee, one from the angle of leadership, and then one from the angle of the business model. And so when we were thinking about what are the angles that every stakeholder in this new world of work needs to better understand, we realized that Keith had a particular, my co-author, Keith Ferrazzi, had a particular expertise around leadership and around teams, which is really, really critical. And I had an expertise around business model innovation and workforce styles. And so the two of us coming together was actually 1 + 1 = 3, rather than each of us independently writing a book that wouldn't have the breadth and the depth that would be needed for a reader for this particular context. And so we came together, we came to partner because we realized we had a very symbiotic relationship in terms of making sure that our knowledge and our advice was going to be really valuable across the spectrum. And then you asked me the question, which was, how did we actually physically, separate the writing style? And I think there's different ways to do this. But because our book had really two very concrete sections, the first half of the book was around leadership behaviors and, for example, collaboration, team resilience, and agility. These were the domains that Keith had expertise in. And the second half of the book were around business model innovation, around workforce redesign, around foresight, learning how to see around corners. These were the domains that I was an expert in. So we actually very evenly divided the book. He wrote the first half, I wrote the second half, which meant we each had about 3 or 4 chapters to write each. We would draft them, and then the other would obviously read them and give feedback and give context and to make sure it all made sense. And we had a third writer, Noel Wayrich, who is really Keith's editor. And he was really responsible for, in addition to helping draft parts of some of the chapters, he was really responsible for making sure the tone between the different chapters connected. And so we had one cohesive tone across the entire book. And that's how we decided to really divide up the book. But that's not the only way to do it. Some co-authors can decide to write, one chapter together or several chapters together, and they take different sections and they iterate and collaborate. And there's different ways to do it. This is how we chose to do it because it just made a lot of sense for the structure of our book and our content.
You know, it's interesting, Kian, because through Maui Writers Conference, every year we would have this question come up, is that I'm thinking about co-authoring a book. Now, how do we split royalties? What if one person ends up doing more of the writing than the other? You know, what if one person doesn't do any marketing and the other one's doing all the marketing? And if it's not clarified up front, it can get pretty sticky pretty fast. And I'm intrigued with this idea of having a trinity, this third party who's like the overarching voice, almost like a mediator, right? Or a panel moderator who has the book's best interest in mind, and who you're both participating, but he is almost the final voice. Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, that's fair to say in some ways. I think in business writing, and a lot of business authors have a, I don't want to call it a ghostwriter. Some people do. We wrote our own chapters, and so Noel, our third co-author, was very much instrumental in making sure that the chapters flowed from a tone perspective together. Yeah. But he's not the domain expert for either of the sections that Keith and I wrote, and so he would take final content and practical application insight from us, but he was responsible really for tone and connectivity, and so that's really important. Co-writing a book is in many ways like a marriage. It's a marriage for a project, and like you said, it's critical to know in advance who does what the assumptions are around who does the marketing, how the marketing gets done, how you might have a budget for that marketing. Those are all questions that should really be answered in advance, so that there are no difficult conversations after the fact, because you never want to have the conversations after the fact. Mm-hmm. And so the more you have an agreement in advance, the better it is. Keith and I were just very, very well aligned in our mindset in terms of what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it. And so it's been a really wonderful experience.
You know, and I want to circle back to something you said, Kian, because sometimes people think, okay, the book is done and it's over. And then when I speak, I only speak on what's in the book. Yet you said, even when the book was turned into the publisher before it came out, you were still updating content. You were still adding examples, and it's very dynamic. So can you talk to that ever evolving body of work that transcends just the book itself?
Yeah, so the book came out in February of 2022. So just again, 3 months ago. Our final lock deadline with our publisher in terms of content was August, so 6 months in advance. And we were writing about a very timely topic about what it means to lead in a post-pandemic environment. And if you go back to the summer of 2021, we were all hoping that a pandemic was winding down, but we learned that wasn't the case with the Delta and Omicron spikes. And so we still had to learn new things. And once the book had gone to print, we couldn't obviously make any changes to it, but there were still a lot of really critical insights and best practices that we did develop after the fact. And so when we are doing our promotion for the book, and also for the work that we do, which is really helping develop high practice returns for creating exponential teams, the book is critical, obviously. Like, that's sort of the fundamental body of work that we rely on. But we've done so much more since then in terms of articles and periodicals and white papers that we put out, that those in itself could be another book if we wanted to develop that. And so the research and the writing doesn't stop once the book is finished. And the joy of having a book is that you get to go on a book tour, hopefully afterwards, whether that's virtually or in person. And then you get to come down and have a little bit of a hangover from that book tour, which I'm sort of in between right now. And then you have to really kick yourself and say, wow, I still got a lot more writing to do.
Yeah. In fact, let's talk now about the book tour, because a lot of people wonder, did the publisher put that together for you? Did you put that together? It's like based on Keith's reputation, Never Eat Alone, and your reputation. Did the speaking offers come in, or did you have to go after them? So talk us through setting up that book tour, please.
So maybe step back a little bit before the book tour to talk broadly around book promotion and book marketing. And I'm a first-time author. Keith, my co-author, this was his fourth book, so he had a lot more experience in this, and he was a great guide, a facilitator for me to walk me through it. From what I learned is that publishers generally do not do book promotion or marketing for you, unless you happen to be, the next Anne Rice novel, or you are going to have a massive, massive hit. But even then, that might just be 10 books a year that a publishing house will actively promote, and the rest of the promotion really is dependent on the author. And so it is a tremendous amount of hustle to promote your book. The writing, which I thought was the hard part. Keith told me when we finished the first draft, oh no, this is not the hard part. The hard part is book promotion. And I was like, wow, I can't even possibly imagine book promotion being harder than writing the book. And that is exponentially true. And so the promotion really falls on the author to use their network to generate buzz and sales and develop your own book tour. I will say that for us, we had an amazing publisher, Harvard Business Review Press, and HBR Press has a very large database of customers that they've really helped learn about executive education for decades. And so from what I understand, from what Keith's experiences with previous publishers, is that our publisher, HBR Press, really was the best in terms of providing marketing support for our book, which typically does not happen if you go to a traditional trade business publisher. And so HBR Press actually had 2 webinars that they had set up for us with their global database of consumers here in the US and in Europe, which was just a great opportunity to share the message. But in terms of the actual book tour, first of all, so much of it was done virtually. And then a lot of it, once the pandemic had receded and we had entered this post Omicron state, then a lot of things opened up. And so leading up to the book tour, we probably did about between 30 and 50 podcasts. So all of that is basically a virtual book tour, right? And so that was all done in advance of the launch. And then when pub date happened, then those podcasts all went live. Following the 2 weeks of the book being out in the press, we had a couple opportunities that our public relations team had put together. For example, introduced us to South by Southwest to do a book reading there, and then introduced us to a variety of other potential speaking gigs. These are all non-paid. And then you actively have to market the book to your own list and your own clients and your own existing clients who know you and love you and care about what you have to say. And that certainly opened up a variety of speaking engagements for both of us, and also new ones that developed as a result of those speaking engagements. And so all I'll say is that it is a non-stop marketing hustle to really make your book successful. Writing is the easy part.
Although one of the many ways it paid off was that we're looking at a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, aren't we?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Yes, I forget that is the case as well, and Keith says that you're a nationally best-selling author, and I just forget about that. And so yes, that is a lot of work, and I'm very proud of it. I really think the book is a book that will be a greenfield for long term, and HBR Press is going to actively promote it on their ecosystem for the next year. They've turned it into a video course that readers can also watch and also be able to participate in. So we created other products on top of the actual book to be able to really help readers learn, whether they're learning from a visual perspective or just reading the book. I did work probably 15 hours a day for 3 to 4 months leading up to pub date. And people didn't understand, who hadn't written a book before, what that entailed, and neither had I. But it was just tremendous amount of work on marketing, on promotion, on creating additional content, on creating additional press, additional ways to really get your message out there. And like you said, Sam, the end result was that it turned into a national bestseller as a result of that.
Yeah, and it sounds like you used your degree from Northwestern and from London School of Economics and from Harvard Business, all in just like the promotion of the book. You need a business mind, don't you, to coordinate all the activities. So now, question though is that reflecting back, we like to cherry pick best practices. So when you think about whether it was sending out complimentary books to influencers and decision makers, whether it was asking your mailing list to post on social media, whether it was doing those webinars for HBR Press, when you look back and reverse engineer it, what was the highest ROI of one of your marketing efforts?
I do not like using email marketing very much. It's not my preferred option because I feel like it's spam. That's just been personally me for my entire life. And so I have a newsletter that I send very rarely to my list, maybe twice a year, if that. I just don't like marketing across that channel. I don't like to come across spammy, but I did use it actually when the book came out. And I asked people to please help me. And the people who are on my list know me and they love me and they care about me. And when I asked them to help on Pub Day to really drive sales through Amazon and other channels, I got literally hundreds of emails in response in terms of absolutely, I want to help you. And so for me, that was one small way that I used email marketing as a channel. Social media, I didn't really find very powerful in terms of actually getting people to, let's say, buy the book. So in this day and age, when there is so much information overload and so much desire for your attention and your mind span, you really have to get people to see your book on average between 7 and 10 times before they actually will make a purchasing decision. And so the amount of work that it goes to really get people to really think about what your book is a lot of work. And so for social media, that was, I didn't find it that particularly useful because you just have to be so prevalent. And my social media network is not very big and it's been private on purpose. What I would say that was very useful was that my book is directly relevant to my clients. And so in advance of the book coming out, I had reached out to my clients and I sent them all galleys, the ones that I had worked with in advance. And I said, this is a book that's coming out very shortly. I'd love for you to take a look at it. And if you find it interesting, I'd love to have a conversation after it's published to see whether I can help your organization learn about it. So sending galleys to your clients in advance is really critical. Sending galleys to potential influencers is really useful. And so what took me a lot of time, honestly, was identifying the database of people that I needed to reach out to in advance. And I had to clean up that database. And that took me like a long time. And I had to do it alone with some staff that helped me part-time. But it was identifying who are the categories of people that I need to send the book out to who might potentially buy the book, the categories of people who might be influencers, who might want to talk about the book, potential channel partners who I could reach out to that we could then collaborate on after the book is done. And so for me to clean up that database took a very long time, but that was really critical and valuable use of time. It was just painful.
You know, thank you for your honesty, Kian, because you know, I believe that writing is a joy and a gift and a blessing. And there are times where the words flow out so fast, my fingers can't keep up. However, that's not always how it is. So I know our audience would like to ask some questions. So one more question for me, and then we'll open it up and you're welcome to put it in chat or raise your hand and Kendra will call on you. So talk about the writing, Kian. You've lived this, you've worked with clients, you've been in organizations. So a lot of this information, you've embodied it and you've taught it and you believe in it. Were there times where the writing was a joy, or was it pretty much, I got to do 50 pages this week, or what was your writing process?
So April of 2020, we started the project. As I mentioned earlier, we had developed we did 2,000 interviews with entrepreneurs and executives across the world over a 1 year span. And so by the end of 2020, we had an initial structure for the table of contents for the book. This is after our publisher had approved the deal and had given us the go ahead. And so 8 months later, we had a table of contents. We had a first draft due, let's call it by the end of March of 2021. So by January of 2021, we had developed a structure and we had written the first chapter, but we still had to write 8 more chapters. And I actually sequestered myself for 3 months in a small casita in Palm Springs in the middle of a peak COVID winter, not surrounded by anybody I knew. And that really allowed me to focus in that 10-week period to write over 30,000 words, which was really critical to make sure I met the publisher deadline. And that was a very serious deadline. We were not allowed to miss it. And so for 10 weeks, all I did was draft, think, redraft, and sometimes throw away big chunks and restart again. And so we had our first manuscript draft finished by the end of March. And then we went through actually a academic review process because Harvard requires that because it's an academic publisher. And so we had to go through peer review that required about 20 people who are professors and also executives to read the book and give us feedback. And then we had to make edits afterwards. And that's not typical for most trade publishers. And so that added an additional 2 months of editing process. I will say that the writing came pretty easily to me. Once I knew what I was going to say, I would just sit down and write for 12 hours a day. And writing 30,000 words actually came very, very easily because I actually had too much stuff to do. But there was a time when on my last chapter, I could not figure out the angle. I could not figure out how to put it. And I had written something and I realized that was just not the right way to do it. And so what I did was I go for walks with my dog and I was in Palm Springs. I didn't know anybody. It was peak COVID. And so I went for a walk with them for an hour and a half. And on that walk, I just had a lot of clarity and I realized that the structure for this one chapter was not going to work. And I came back after having written 8,000 words, threw it all away, restarted it, but then I wrote it within 3 days straight. So sometimes you have to realize that what you had done doesn't work and you have to set your ego aside. This is the other thing I'd say, Sam, was a big learning lesson for me, was that, wow, we think we're the expert in our field, but there are so many people who are involved in the publishing process, from your literary agent to your publisher, to your peer reviewers, to you name it, and you have to your co-authors, and you have to really set your ego aside and say, I am willing to get any feedback that people think will make this end product better. And that's something hard to do when you think you're the world's expert on that particular field. But at the end, you have a better product.
How about kudos to you for the discipline, Kian, of there you were, final chapter, the finish line in view, and it did not feel right. And yay for going on a walk with your dog. And they say that angels whisper to a man when he walks, and you getting clarity that there was a better way, and then having the fortitude to set it aside and start from scratch on that last chapter.
Absolutely. And sometimes angels nudge you along, and sometimes publishers and agents nudge you along.
Wonderful. Well, I know we have some questions from the audience. So who would like to make a comment on Kian's wonderful book, which is Competing in the New World of Work? Once again, it's from Harvard Business Review Press, and it is How Radical Adaptability Separates the Best from the Rest. So who has our first question or comment, please? Corinne, I think, did I see your hand up there?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear.
Congratulations, Kian. I can't wait
Thank you
to.
very much. Thank you.
I am currently writing a book on negotiation, and I know in some of your talks you talk about decision drivers. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do entrepreneurs, CEOs, and team members need to learn or change in terms of their perspective as it relates to collaboration and negotiation in the post-pandemic workplace?
Great question. So the pandemic taught us that collaboration isn't about where you work, but it's about how you show up to work. And whether you do that in a virtual environment or hybrid or in person, it doesn't really matter. These tools that we have now, which we had in the past, like Zoom, they weren't widely used until we had to in the pandemic era. These tools actually really allow us to lean in to get voices of inclusion from across our team, to crowdsource best ideas, and also to think about how do we collaborate differently. Now, what does that mean? That means that there's what we call the collaboration stack, which is a continuum of work, from doing work in person to doing work remotely to doing work hybrid to finally doing work asynchronously, which means you're not working at the same time or in the same place. And this collaboration stack is a continuum, and there's different tasks that are better suited for different parts of that collaboration stack. So figuring out if what your organization and what your team needs to be able to thrive is really critical to make sure that in this post-pandemic environment, you're really identifying the right tasks to be done at the right level, so that you can benefit from the workplace innovations that we had from the last 2 years. And we like to say, not go back to work, but rather go forward to work.
Okay, good. That's great. And I had one more quick follow-up question. I know that Tony Robbins interviewed an AI individual. We'll use that term lightly. And he experimented with that AI gal in a negotiation. What are your thoughts about AI technology as it relates to negotiation?
Well, I'm not an expert in this space to give you a concrete answer on how it relates to negotiation. But what I can tell you is that AI is getting a lot more powerful as more data and more algorithms are being developed, and this data is being used to develop these training models. Whether it's going to be generally useful for negotiation or for a particular exercise really depends on the level of data that goes into the training set for that particular AI. Now, I would imagine maybe something that's similar is in terms of negotiation is gambling, and like whether somebody is a good bluffer or not a good bluffer. And sometimes you can tell based on facial recognition or facial cues how somebody is going to react in maybe a negotiation or maybe at the gambling table. And so I would imagine that AI technologies can take some of that human fallibility out of that exercise and make it a little more difficult for us to be able to get visual cues to figure out how a negotiation might go. That's my first thought, but my general thought is that a lot of these experiments that you see are, they work well in a lab environment, but they don't necessarily work well in a general environment, because these algorithms are really trained on specific narrow data sets. And as soon as you move outside a particular parameter, then the algorithm doesn't really know how to react. And so I'm not familiar with that exact experiment that Tony ran with the AI negotiator, but it shows the potential for what's possible, even if it's not fully practical in like the very short near term.
Right. Thank you so much. That does align with my research. And of course, they can't come close to the empathy for women, for humans. But anyway, thank you for your responses.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And Leah, I saw your hand up. So question or comment for Kian, please.
Oh, thank you, Kian. I'm sorry I came in late. I've got your book down. I'm really looking forward to reading it, and I congratulate you and the marathon of writing the book. I have written a lot of books, and I'm sort of I've written a lot of books and published with none by Harvard Business Review, and none that I even would consider to be a business book before, but a very brilliant coach who I've been speaking with suggested it's time for me to do a book on this new subject that I'm dealing with. And of course, having been through publishing many times, second only to the fact that I've just had my mouth ripped apart, my stomach went like berserk, because it's a wonderful adventure, and it's, you know, it's hard work. It's not, nothing.
It's certainly a roller coaster.
It's a roller
It's
coaster.
an
And it's
adventure and a
certainly
roller coaster.
not as much, not as romantic as I used to think it would be when I first wrote a book years and years ago. However, what I'm really curious about from your perspective is in competing in this new world with all the people that you're interviewing, because I'm wondering where you think innovation and creativity comes into what people are looking for or interested in. You know, I think of Harvard Business Review, or I think of business generally, because I feel generally intimidated because, well, I won't go into the whole thing. I can take that up with an analyst, but the point is that I'm wondering how you hear that coming in with people. If you were taking on now a whole new subject, if you know, and it regarded a realization that you had about, you know, new ways of seeing things after speaking with people, all these entrepreneurs, would innovation and creativity be something that you think people are looking to lead with?
So I would say absolutely yes. My background's in innovation for decades, and so that is my area of expertise. And so I would absolutely say yes. The other thing I'd say, though, is that innovation doesn't always pay. And what I mean by that is that it's an experiment. And it is seen by a lot of organizations as nice to have, especially if you're thinking about really transformational innovation stuff. It's nice to have, but it's not necessary. And so a lot of organizations actually have a hard time with innovation because they want it to be short term, and they want it to be really practical, and they want it to be very much like responsive to sort of the here and now. And that's just not how innovation always works. And so I say all this, that there are amazing books on innovation out there that I've seen in the past and are role models. And there are lots of books that have been written in that genre that have also not been successful from a commercial perspective. Our book was very, very practical of what do you do now. And I think that is really critical because your general business reader is really interested. You know, some are interested in general academic theories and in ideas, but a lot of them are really interested in self-help around their business now. And so in the context of innovation, when you're writing about it, I'd recommend writing in the context that there's a very key, tangible, practical takeaway that your audience can do immediately now, and not something that is long-term. And so I think there's, you know, the business genre is very broad. There's a lot of books around leadership. There's a lot of books around innovation. I think creativity is really powerful, really important for how we lead in this new world and how we live in this bionic age side by side with AI. But it is not something that is highly remunerated in terms of organizations making sure that they're putting a lot of budget behind it, because organizations are putting budgets behind things that are here and now, like sales, leadership, marketing, all the more functional things than the less aspirational things. But I do absolutely think innovation and creativity are very critical to success in this new world.
Well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to reading your book, which I will get when I get off this call. I will order for sure. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And now we just have a few minutes left to wrap up. So Catherine, a question from you and then one from me. And many people are feeding their kids or commuting down the way home, so they have their screens off. It's just that they can watch this. We'll put it up on our Facebook group afterwards. And so they can watch and listen in the days and weeks and months ahead. Catherine, over to you.
My tangible takeaway that I can put into practice right now is that iteration is king. Iteration is what gives you the courage to toss the crap that didn't work in the notebook and rewrite that chapter. And I think if we go into any kind of writing or innovation, from what I heard tonight, with the idea that I may be writing this first draft and maybe I'm going to toss it, and in that process, it's going to tell me how to get it right, then I'm going to be so much happier and not as much stress. I'll have checked the ego like the AI, but I'll be smarter than the AI because I can actually think on my own.
I love that. That's great. Wonderful takeaway.
Iteration is king. Yay. So, and now, Kian, let's wrap up with a personal story, because 60-second story, and then over to you, is that I'll always remember we talked about the art from ideation to a successful reality. And when John Tullius and Shannon Tullius and I started Maui Writers Conference, it just was up here. We wanted to bring the mountain to Muhammad. We wanted to do a world-class conference. And then there was all the work of asking the speakers and doing the promotion and getting cheeks in the seats and setting up our agent interviews and our pitch sessions and our manuscript marketplace. And I'll always remember on one Friday evening at the Grand Wailea, we were sitting in the front row. And that night it was Dave Barry who had us laughing in the aisles, and Ka'ili Rochelle, who just brought his whole halau from Carnegie Hall and put on a show for us. And John and I looked at each other, and in that moment, we knew we had made it. What we had envisioned had come true, was everything we had hoped it would be and more. It was a chicken skin moment, as they say in Hawaii. So Kian, a personal story from you. When you had that chicken skin experience, you looked around, and in a way, you and your book have made it.
It's a beautiful story for that. Thanks for sharing that, Sam. I don't know if I have something as eloquent or as elegant to share from a story perspective. But one thing I'd say is in response to something that Catherine said around iteration and testing things and making sure that what you're writing is really good. And if I have one piece of advice, is that iteration is really the heart of radical adaptability. It's part of actually what we talk about in terms of agility. But you have to recognize that it's a very exhausting process, and emotionally and mentally and physically sometimes. And so the other part of the coin, the flip side of the coin of iteration, is resilience. And so you have to give yourself enough time to be able to recover. So when you have a really rough training day at the gym, you always have a rest day, maybe even 2 rest days. And so in this process of writing, in this process of climbing many hills along the process of publishing, you're going to have many steep hills to overcome, and you have to iterate to figure out how to get across each of them. But I'd really recommend for you to build in time to have downtime and resilience for individually, so that you don't get exhausted by this process, because it is not a sprint. It is a marathon. It literally took us almost 2 years from the beginning of the idea to when we published, actually 23 months for it to happen. And so you have to have the stamina to get across the finish line. And you can only do that by making sure that your energy reserves are built up, and that you're not exhausted and depleted, and that you are learning how to have the skill to be able to climb the next hill easier and faster. And so my deep advice for people who are on the journey is to recognize that it's a marathon, and that you have to, yes, iterate to come up with new ideas that would fit into the genre of the book, but then also to give yourself enough downtime and separation from it to be able to then make sure that you're not completely exhausted over that marathon of writing that book.
Okay. Kian, I am not letting you go until you tell a personal story. So Kian, there could be, who knows, it could be one of your professors got in touch to say, hey, I remember you as a student and I just read your book and it was really good, Kian. Maybe it was a family member who just told you how proud they were of you or how happy they were for you. Or maybe it was that one of your readers got in touch and they put one of your ideas into practice and it's really transforming their organization, or it saved a project or something. So come on, put me in the scene where your heart was glad that you did this project.
Well, I'll give you a personal story since you keep asking for it. I studied history as an undergrad, and I had this professor, T.H. Breen, who is one of the most well-known professors of colonial American history. And I had zero interest in colonial American history, zero. But I was advised to take his classes in college because he would help transform my mind and also my writing. And we would have to read a book every week on that particular topic, and we'd have to write a 2-page summary book report on that topic. And you can imagine summarizing a book in 5 paragraphs is very hard to do, but Professor Breen really helped me learn how to write critically 20 plus years ago. and make my thinking succinct in a way that could fit in a way that was short. And we've been in touch for many years. And I sent him a copy of my book when it came out, and he's now retired professor. And he was really proud of me that it finally came through. Not on the topic that he'd want me to write on, which is on history, but nevertheless, I learned how to write because of him and his classes 20 plus years ago. And it really felt nice to have him be part of that journey.
Isn't that, see, that's just one example of the full circle rewards of writing. It connects us with and reconnects us with people that give a heart to this writing process of taking your knowledge and experience and expertise and getting it out in the world where it can make a difference. You've really made a difference for us, Kian. I hope that people enjoy and then put a review, reach out to personally to let you know a favorite part of the book or something that they were motivated to do. So once again, competing in the new world of work with Kian Gohar. And thank you so much for being our guest tonight on Inside the Author Studio.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's always a joy to share space with you.
Thank you. Onward to all of you, and we'll see you in our next program, where instead of a book club discussion, we're actually having a podcast discussion. The Brain Podcast interviewed 4 of the top nonfiction writers. It was, let's see, Mark Manson and James Clear and several authors who shared their best practices on what they've done to help make their books a success. And we'll be listening to those podcasts and then sharing our takeaways. So we'll look forward to seeing you next time. And once again, check out Kian Gohar's work. And thanks for joining us.